The night my husband left me crying in the rain was the night I accidentally got into a car with the most dangerous man in the city. And it was the best mistake I ever made. The storm outside matched the chaos in my heart as I pressed my back against the cold brick wall of St. Mary's Children's Hospital. Rain hammered the city like bullets from an angry sky, each drop a reminder of how thoroughly my life had unraveled in the span of 30 minutes. My hands still trembled from the adrenaline of saving little Tommy Martinez. The 8-year-old had coded twice during his emergency appendectomy, and I'd spent the last 4 hours holding his tiny hand while machines fought to keep him breathing. Another double shift. Another child pulled back from the edge. Another day that David would dismiss as meaningless, because it didn't pay enough to matter. Isabella, you need to understand priorities. His voice echoed in my ears even now, harsh and cutting through the December wind. We can't afford your savior complex anymore. I got an offer today, a real job, but it means we need to start thinking about our future, about having kids. Kids. The word still made my chest tighten with a familiar panic. At 28, I should have been ready. Most women my age were already mothers, juggling careers and family with the grace I saw in my patients' parents every day. But every time David brought up children, all I could see was my father walking out that door when I was 7, leaving nothing but empty promises and a mother who never recovered. I'm not ready, David. You know why. Your daddy issues aren't my problem anymore, Isabella. Either you grow up and give me what I want, or I find someone who will. The argument had escalated from there, voices rising until other staff members started staring. David had grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh above my elbow, with a grip that would leave bruises. Maybe standing in the rain for a while will teach you to appreciate what you have at home. And then he was gone, squealing out of the parking garage in his rusted Honda, leaving me stranded 20 miles from our apartment with nothing but my purse and the thin scrubs that offered no protection against the winter storm. I fumbled for my phone, fingers numb with cold as I tried to call an Uber. The screen flickered once, twice, then went black. Dead battery. Of course. Damn it, I whispered, shoving the useless device back into my pocket. The parking garage was nearly empty now. Just a few scattered vehicles belonging to night shift staff who wouldn't leave for hours. I could walk back inside and ask for help, but the humiliation of explaining why my husband had abandoned me felt worse than freezing to death. That's when I saw it. A sleek black sedan idling near the exit ramp, hazard lights blinking in a steady rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat in the darkness. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I could make out the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat. My Uber. It had to be. The timing was too perfect to be anything else. I ran toward the car, heels clicking against wet concrete, my nurse's bag bouncing against my hip. The rear passenger door was unlocked, and I slid inside with a gasp of relief, grateful to escape the storm even if it was just for the ride home. Thank God, I breathed, wiping rain from my face with the back of my hand. I thought you'd canceled when I didn't answer my phone. The battery died, and my husband... Where the hell did you come from? The voice that interrupted me was nothing like I expected from an Uber driver. It was deep, cultured, with an accent I couldn't place. Italian, maybe. Rich as dark chocolate and twice as dangerous. I looked up and felt the world tilt beneath me. The man in the back seat wasn't a driver at all. He was pressed against the far window, one hand clutched to his side where something dark was spreading across the white fabric of an expensive shirt. Even in the dim light from the dashboard, I could see the sharp angles of his face, the way shadows pooled in the hollows of his cheeks. His hair was black as the storm outside, slicked back from a forehead that spoke of intelligence and ruthlessness in equal measure. And his eyes, God, his eyes were the color of winter sky just before a blizzard. Pale gray blue and so intense, they seemed to look right through me to places I'd forgotten existed. I'm sorry, I stammered, already reaching for the door handle. I thought this was my ride. I'll just... Stay still. The command was quiet, but absolute. Marcus, drive. The driver, whom I hadn't even noticed before, nodded once and pulled away from the curb. I felt trapped between politeness and panic, unsure whether I was being kidnapped or simply caught in a case of mistaken identity. Please, I really need to get out. This is just a misunderstanding. The stranger studied me with those unnerving eyes, taking in my soaked scrubs, my trembling hands, the way I was pressed against the door like a cornered animal. "Who left you out there?" The question was so unexpected that I answered before I could think better of it. "My husband. He was teaching me a lesson." Something dangerous flickered in his expression. What kind of lesson requires leaving a woman alone in a storm? I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly aware of how pathetic I must look, the kind that shows me what I have to lose if I don't give him what he wants. And what does he want? Children, a family, things I'm not ready to give him. The words spilled out before I could stop them. 3 years of marriage counseling and buried resentment flowing like blood from a wound. He thinks I'm broken because I won't just snap my fingers and become the perfect wife. The man was quiet for a long moment, still watching me with that unsettling intensity. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but no less commanding. "Some lessons are more dangerous than others, Isabella." My blood turned to ice. "How do you know my name?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of what looked like a gun holstered beneath his jacket. The spreading stain on his shirt was definitely blood, and from the way he held himself, the wound was serious. "You're hurt," I said, my medical training overriding my fear. "You need to get to a hospital." "No hospitals." "But you're bleeding. That looks like—" "I said no hospitals." The steel in his voice left no room for argument. "Marcus, take us home." "Sir, shouldn't we drop the lady off first?" "No." His eyes never left mine. "I think Mrs. Parker and I have more to discuss." The fact that he knew my married name sent fresh terror racing through my veins. This wasn't a random encounter. This man, whoever he was, had been expecting me, or at least expecting someone like me. "Please," I whispered. "I don't know what this is about, but I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just a nurse. I save children's lives. That's all I do." "Children's lives." He repeated the words thoughtfully, as if they meant something specific to him. "Noble work. Thankless, I imagine. Sometimes. Your husband doesn't appreciate your calling." It wasn't a question, and I found myself nodding anyway. "David thinks I should quit. Find something that pays better. Start a family instead of taking care of other people's children. David Parker." Again, that dangerous knowledge. Gambling debts. Borrowed money from people who don't forgive easily. My mouth went dry. "How could you possibly know that?" He smiled then, and it was nothing like kindness. "I make it my business to know everything about people who enter my world, Mrs. Parker. And whether you realize it or not, you just entered mine." The car turned onto a private road lined with iron gates and security cameras. Through the rain-streaked windows, I could see the outline of a massive house rising from manicured grounds like something from a Gothic novel. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," he said. "Somewhere we can continue this conversation without interruption. I need to get home. David will be worried." Another smile. This one even more predatory than the last. "I doubt that very much. But don't worry, Isabella. You're under my protection now." The car came to a stop in a circular driveway, and I realized with bone-deep certainty that whatever life I'd had before this moment was over. The woman who'd entered this car was already gone, dissolved in the storm like rain on concrete. All that remained was discovering who I was meant to become. The mansion's interior was a testament to wealth beyond my comprehension. As Marcus led me through an entrance hall that could have housed my entire apartment, I found myself gawking at Renaissance paintings that looked authentic enough to belong in museums. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors so polished they reflected like mirrors, and fresh orchids arranged in Ming vases perfumed the air with an elegance I'd only imagined. My soaked scrubs dripped onto the pristine floor, leaving a trail of evidence from the storm I'd barely escaped. Everything about this place whispered of power, control, and money. So much money that it felt almost obscene compared to the cramped hospital rooms where I spent my days fighting to save lives with outdated equipment. "Isabella, please sit down." The man's voice came from behind me, and I turned to see him moving slowly but deliberately toward an ornate chair near a fireplace that could have roasted an entire pig. In the better lighting, I could see just how pale he'd become, though his composure remained unshakable. "You need medical attention," I said, my professional instincts kicking in despite the surreal circumstances. That wound is still bleeding. I'm aware. He settled into the chair with practiced grace that couldn't quite hide his discomfort. But first, we need to address your situation. My situation is that I'm soaking wet in a stranger's house. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly conscious of how inappropriate my presence here was. I should call a taxi. With what phone? His pale eyes held a hint of amusement. And I'm hardly a stranger anymore. Allow me to properly introduce myself. Lorenzo Valenti. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it suggested it should. There was weight behind those syllables, a history of both reverence and fear that I couldn't begin to understand. Mr. Valenti, I appreciate you helping me escape that storm, but I really need to get home. To David? The question carried more knowledge than I was comfortable with. The man who abandoned you in a parking garage during the worst storm of the season? Heat flushed my cheeks. My marriage isn't perfect, but that doesn't give you the right to— Rosa, he called out, and almost immediately, a woman appeared in the doorway. She was perhaps 60, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and eyes that missed nothing. Her clothing was simple, but expensive, and she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who ran this household with absolute efficiency. Yes, Mr. Valenti. Please prepare the blue suite for Mrs. Parker. She'll be staying with us tonight. I will not. I stood up abruptly, water still dripping from my hair. I don't know what kind of man you are, but I'm not spending the night in a stranger's house. Rosa looked between us with practiced discretion, waiting for direction. Lorenzo studied me with those unsettling eyes, and I had the distinct feeling he was cataloging every micro-expression on my face. What kind of man do you think I am, Isabella? The question was loaded with implications I didn't want to explore. I think you're the kind of man who knows too much about people he's just met. Fair enough. He reached into his jacket pocket, causing me to tense until I realized he was only retrieving a phone, and began typing with swift efficiency. Your full name is Isabella Marie Parker, née Richardson. You're 28 years old, born in Portland, Oregon. Your parents died in a house fire when you were 19, leaving you with substantial medical debt that you're still paying off. My blood turned to ice. How could you possibly know that? You graduated summa cum laude from Oregon Health Sciences University with a bachelor's in nursing, specialized in pediatric care because you wanted to protect children, the way no one protected you after your father walked out when you were 7. Stop. My voice came out as barely a whisper. You married David Parker 3 years ago. He works construction when he can find steady employment, but he has a gambling problem that's gotten progressively worse. Currently, he owes approximately $47,000 to various bookmakers and loan sharks. The room seemed to spin around me. That's impossible. David doesn't gamble that much, doesn't he? Lorenzo set his phone aside and fixed me with those penetrating eyes. When was the last time you saw your joint bank account, Isabella? I opened my mouth to answer, then realized I couldn't. David handled all our finances, said it was easier that way, that I had enough stress at work without worrying about bills and budgets. I trusted him, because trusting him was easier than confronting the possibility that I'd married another man who would abandon me when things got difficult. You investigated me. The words came out accusatory, but underneath the anger was a bone-deep fear. Why? I investigate everyone who enters my world. Lorenzo's expression remained neutral, but there was something almost gentle in his tone. And whether you realize it or not, you entered my world the moment you got into that car. I made a mistake. I thought you were my Uber driver. There are no mistakes in my line of work, only opportunities and consequences. He gestured toward Rosa, who had remained silent throughout this exchange. The blue suite, please, and ask Marcus to bring Mrs. Parker's belongings from the car. I don't have any belongings, I protested. Just my purse and— The bag in the back seat. The one you brought from the hospital. My medical kit. In all the chaos, I'd forgotten I was still carrying my supplies. Some nurses left their kits at work, but I'd learned to keep essential items with me after too many emergencies where seconds mattered. You really do need medical attention, I said, looking at the spreading stain on his shirt. Let me help you. Why? The question seemed genuinely curious. You don't know me. For all you understand, I could be dangerous. Are you? A ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. Very. Then why help me at all? Why not just drop me off somewhere and continue with whatever you were doing? Because, Isabella Parker, he said, rising from his chair with careful deliberation, your husband's debts have made you a person of interest to some very unforgiving people. Whether you know it or not, you're already in danger. The words hit me like a physical blow. What kind of danger? The kind that doesn't ask politely for repayment. Lorenzo moved closer, and I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and masculine that made my pulse quicken in ways I didn't want to examine. The kind that uses family members to encourage prompt payment. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to save your life. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Your husband borrowed money from people who consider breaking kneecaps a reasonable collection method. You think they won't use a pretty nurse to motivate him? My legs felt suddenly weak. I sank back into the chair, mind reeling with implications I'd been too naive to consider. All those late nights David claimed to be working extra shifts. All those mysterious phone calls he took in the other room. All those times he'd been evasive about money, about bills, about why we could never seem to get ahead despite both of us working full-time. How much does he really owe? I asked. More than he can pay. Lorenzo's expression was almost sympathetic. More than he'll ever be able to pay without help. And you're offering to help? There had to be a catch. Men like Lorenzo Valenti didn't help people out of kindness. I'm offering you protection. He extended his hand toward me. Come, let's take care of this wound and then we can discuss terms. Terms? I stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would change everything. Protection isn't free, Isabella. But I promise you, the price I'm asking is far more reasonable than what David's creditors will demand. I looked up into those pale eyes and saw something that scared me more than any threat. Genuine concern. This man, this stranger who knew intimate details about my life, actually seemed to care what happened to me. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I placed my hand in his. Good. His fingers closed around mine with surprising gentleness. Rosa will show you to your room after we're finished. You're safe here. Safe. The word felt foreign on my tongue. A concept I'd forgotten existed somewhere between my father's abandonment and David's increasing desperation. For the first time in years, I almost believed it might be true. The blue suite Rosa had prepared for me was larger than the apartment David and I shared. Egyptian cotton sheets draped a king-sized bed that could have slept 4 people comfortably, while floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked gardens that remained beautiful even in winter's harsh grip. A marble bathroom contained amenities I'd only seen in luxury hotel magazines, and a walk-in closet held clothing in exactly my size. I stood before those clothes now, fingering fabric that cost more than I made in a month. Silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, designer jeans that had never seen the inside of a discount store. Everything fit perfectly, as if Lorenzo had somehow known my measurements down to the last inch. The realization sent another chill through me. How long had he been watching? How much did he know about my daily routines, my preferences, my life with David? I'd spent 2 hours treating Lorenzo's wound after I'd agreed to stay. The bullet had passed cleanly through his side, missing vital organs by mere inches. As I'd cleaned and sutured the injury, he'd remained perfectly still, watching my face with those unsettling pale eyes. His pain tolerance was inhuman. Most people would have been writhing or at least gripping something for support. But Lorenzo had simply observed me work as if I were providing routine medical care rather than battlefield surgery in his living room. You have steady hands, he'd said as I'd finished the final stitch. I work with children. Steady hands are a requirement. And yet you're trembling. I had been. Not from the medical procedure. I could suture wounds in my sleep. But from the growing awareness that Lorenzo Valenti was unlike any man I'd ever encountered. There was something predatory about his stillness, something dangerous in the way he seemed to anticipate my every move. Now, dressed in borrowed clothes that fit like they'd been tailored for my body, I tried to process the conversation we'd had afterward. Lorenzo had explained, in terms both clinical and terrifying, exactly how deep David's gambling debts ran. Not just the $47,000 he'd mentioned, but additional loans from progressively more dangerous sources. Men who didn't accept payment plans or sob stories about sick children and medical bills. Your husband owes money to Viktor Petrov, Lorenzo had said, settling back into his chair as I'd cleaned my instruments. Do you know that name? I'd shaken my head, though something about it made my skin crawl. Petrov runs the Russian interests in this city. Unlike more traditional organizations, his people don't believe in gradual escalation. They prefer to make examples that discourage future problems. What kind of examples? The kind that leave widows and orphans. The memory made my hands shake now as I selected a cream-colored sweater from the closet. Everything about this situation screamed danger. Yet I felt safer here than I had in months at home. When had I stopped feeling secure in my own marriage? When had David's increasingly erratic behavior become my new normal? My phone. Lorenzo had provided a replacement after mine died. Buzzed with an incoming call. David's number flashed on the screen, and my stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. Hello? Where the hell are you? His voice was sharp with panic and anger. I came home and you weren't here. Your phone was going straight to voicemail. My phone died. I'm staying somewhere safe tonight. Safe? What's that supposed to mean? Safe from what? The question hung between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to voice. How could I tell him I knew about his debts? About the people he'd borrowed from? About the fact that my life might be in danger because of his choices? Safe from you, I said instead. From arguments about children and priorities and why I'm never enough the way I am. Isabella, come home. We can talk about this. Can we? Or will you just tell me again that my job doesn't matter? That saving children's lives is less important than making babies? There was a long pause. When David spoke again, his voice had taken on a wheedling quality I'd learned to recognize as desperation. I got a new job offer today. Good money. We could afford to have kids, to buy a house. What kind of job pays that well without experience or education? Another pause, longer this time. It's legitimate, Isabella. I promise. Like your gambling is legitimate? Like those phone calls you take in the other room are legitimate? I don't know what you're talking about. The lie came so easily, I wondered how many others he'd told me over the years. How many times had I accepted his explanations without question? Because believing him was easier than confronting the truth. I can't do this anymore, David. I can't pretend everything is fine when it's not. Where are you staying? I'll come get you. No. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. I need time to think. Think about what? We're married, Isabella. You can't just disappear. You left me in a parking garage during a storm. If anyone disappeared first, it was you. I ended the call before he could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline and something that might have been relief. For the first time in years, I'd stood up to David without apologizing or backing down. A soft knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Come in. Lorenzo entered, moving more easily now that his wound had been properly treated. He'd changed into dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. In better light, I could see he was younger than I'd initially thought, perhaps 35, with the kind of masculine beauty that belonged in Renaissance sculptures. How are you feeling? I asked, noting the improved color in his cheeks. Better. Thank you. His eyes took in my appearance, lingering on the way the borrowed clothes fit my figure. The clothing suits you. How did you know my size? I have excellent judgment when it comes to measurements. There was something almost playful in his tone, though his expression remained serious. Your husband called. It wasn't a question, and I didn't bother pretending otherwise. He wants me to come home. And I told him I needed time to think. Lorenzo moved closer, and I caught the scent of his cologne again. Cedar and leather with undertones of something darker, more dangerous. What are you thinking about? Whether my marriage was over before tonight or if I just finally admitted it to myself. Marriage should be a partnership, he said quietly. Protection, loyalty, shared burdens. Not abandonment when things become difficult. Speaking from experience, something flickered in his pale eyes. Pain, perhaps, or regret. My parents were married for 30 years before they died, even when my father's business put the family at risk. They faced it together. That's what love looks like, Isabella. Not what you have with David. Your father's business? I studied his face, noting the careful way he'd phrased it. What kind of business? The kind that requires careful planning and absolute loyalty. Lorenzo's expression grew distant. They were killed when I was 15. A car bomb meant for my father, but they were together that night, always together. The pain in his voice was raw, unguarded in a way that made my chest tighten with sympathy. I'm sorry. I built everything I have now from nothing. Every dollar, every alliance, every moment of safety I've created came from understanding that family is the only thing that matters in this world. And that's what you do? You build safety? His smile was sharp as a blade. I build empires, Isabella. Safety is just a side effect. The words should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself drawn to the confidence in his voice, the absolute certainty that he could protect what belonged to him. When had anyone ever made me feel like I belonged to something worth protecting? The gates are locked, I said, testing the boundaries of my situation. For your protection. Am I a prisoner? You're a guest who's in danger. There's a difference. Lorenzo stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. But I won't lie to you, Isabella. Leaving right now would be extremely unwise. The admission sent heat pooling low in my belly. Not fear, but something far more dangerous. This man who knew too much about my life, who commanded loyalty and inspired terror, was offering me something David never had. Honest protection, without conditions or expectations. What happens tomorrow? I asked. Tomorrow we discuss your future. Tonight, you rest in safety for the first time in months. He was right. I couldn't remember the last time I'd fallen asleep without worrying about money, about David's mood, about whether I'd wake up to another crisis I'd have to fix alone. Thank you, I whispered. Lorenzo reached out and touched my face, his thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. Sleep well, Isabella. Tomorrow, everything changes. The photograph arrived at 7 a.m, slipped under my door while I was still tangled in Egyptian cotton sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. I'd slept better than I had in months, cocooned in luxury and safety I'd forgotten could exist. The image shattered that peace like glass against stone. David's face stared back at me from the glossy surface. But this wasn't the man I'd married 3 years ago. This David was bruised and bloodied, duct tape covering his mouth, terror bright in his eyes. Someone had written across the bottom in red ink, "Trade the nurse for the husband. 1 hour, or he dies slowly." My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the photo. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. I was a pediatric nurse who saved children's lives and went home to a modest apartment. I wasn't someone who received ransom demands written in what looked suspiciously like blood. But the evidence was undeniable. David was in the hands of people who made their living through violence, and somehow I'd become a bargaining chip in a game I didn't understand. I threw on the first clothes I could find, yesterday's jeans and sweater, and ran through the mansion's corridors, my bare feet silent on the marble floors. I'd memorized the route to Lorenzo's study last night, filing away every turn in case I needed to escape. Now I was running toward danger instead of away from it. The study door was already open when I arrived, gasping and clutching the photograph like a lifeline. Lorenzo stood behind his massive desk, speaking in rapid Italian to Marcus and 2 other men I didn't recognize. All 4 turned when I burst through the doorway. "They have David," I said without preamble, holding up the photo. "Someone has my husband." Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his pale eyes. He gestured for the other men to leave, then moved around the desk to take the photograph from my trembling hands. "Viktor Petrov," he said after studying the image for a moment. "This is his work. The Russian you told me about." My voice sounded hollow, distant. "The one David owes money to." "Among others, yes." Lorenzo set the photo aside and fixed me with his penetrating stare. "When did this arrive?" "Just now." It was under my door. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold, despite the warmth of the room. "They want to trade me for him. 1 hour. That's not going to happen." The certainty in his voice should have been comforting, but it only amplified my panic. "You don't understand. If I don't go, they'll kill him. If you do go, they'll kill you both." Lorenzo moved closer, his presence somehow both threatening and reassuring. "This isn't about the money anymore, Isabella. This is about sending a message. What kind of message? That no one takes what belongs to me without consequences. The possessive pronoun hit me like a physical blow. I don't belong to you. Don't you? His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You're wearing my clothes, sleeping in my house, under my protection. You've seen my vulnerabilities, touched my blood. In my world, that creates bonds that don't break easily. I'm married to another man, a man who gambled away your future and put your life in danger. Lorenzo reached out and touched my face, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. A man who left you in a storm because you wouldn't give him children you weren't ready for. The gentle touch made my pulse quicken in ways I didn't want to examine. This was wrong. I was married, frightened, trapped between two dangerous men who both seemed to think they had claims on my life. Yet something about Lorenzo's proximity made rational thought nearly impossible. We have to help David, I insisted. Whatever you think of him. He doesn't deserve to die because of gambling debts. And what about what you deserve, Isabella? Lorenzo's hand moved to cup the back of my neck, fingers tangling in my hair. When do you get to choose your own life, instead of cleaning up other people's mistakes? The question cut deeper than I expected. When had I stopped making choices for myself? When had my entire existence become about managing David's problems, working extra shifts to cover his losses, pretending our marriage wasn't slowly suffocating me? I made a choice when I said my wedding vows. Vows to a man who breaks every promise he makes. Lorenzo stepped closer, close enough that I could see the silver flecks in his pale eyes. Vows to someone who would trade your safety for his own convenience. You don't know him like I do. I know he's never looked at you the way I am right now. The words hung between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to face. Lorenzo was right. David had never looked at me like I was precious, irreplaceable, worth protecting at any cost. Even in our early days, his attention had felt casual, distracted, like I was a pleasant accessory to his real life, rather than the center of it. But this man, this dangerous stranger who commanded empires and inspired fear, looked at me like I was the most important thing in his world. The Russians won't negotiate, Lorenzo continued, his voice soft but implacable. This photograph is theater. They've already decided David's fate. Then we have to try something else. Desperation made my voice crack. There has to be another way. There is. His thumb traced across my lower lip, and I felt heat pool low in my belly despite the gravity of our situation. But it requires you to trust me completely. What are you asking? Let me handle Viktor Petrov. Let me protect what's mine. And David will face the consequences of his choices. Lorenzo's expression hardened, as will everyone else who thought they could take from me without paying the price. Before I could respond, the sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere in the house. Not the sharp crack of pistols, but the rapid staccato of automatic weapons. Lorenzo immediately pushed me behind his desk, his own gun appearing in his hand with practiced speed. Stay down, he commanded, moving toward the window with fluid grace despite his recent injury. More gunshots, closer now. Shouting in multiple languages. The sound of breaking glass from somewhere below us. They're here, Lorenzo said grimly. Victor decided not to wait for your answer. What do we do? We survive. He was already moving toward a wall panel I hadn't noticed before. It slid aside to reveal a hidden passage. There's a safe room behind the wine cellar. Marcus will... The study door exploded inward, wood splintering as armed men in tactical gear flooded through the opening. Lorenzo spun and fired twice, dropping the first two intruders before diving behind a leather chair for cover. I pressed myself against the floor behind the desk, heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. This wasn't my world. I saved children's lives in sterile hospital rooms, not firefights in mansions. The smell of gunpowder and blood filled the air, mixed with shouts in Russian and Italian. Isabella! Lorenzo's voice carried over the chaos. The passage. Now! I started crawling toward the hidden door, staying low as bullets shattered priceless artwork and embedded themselves in walls that had probably stood for generations. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, like being trapped inside a thunderstorm made of violence. A hand grabbed my ankle, yanking me backward. I screamed and kicked, connecting with something soft that made my attacker grunt in pain. Rolling over, I found myself face to face with a man who looked like every stereotype of Russian muscle, blonde, scarred, with cold blue eyes that held no warmth or mercy. "Pretty little nurse," he said in accented English. "Victor has plans for you." I clawed at his face, my nails finding purchase on his cheek and drawing blood. He cursed and raised his hand to strike me. The gunshot was deafeningly loud. The Russian's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the floor beside me, his blood spattering across the Persian rug. Lorenzo stood over us, smoke still rising from the barrel of his gun, his pale eyes blazing with fury that made him look less like a man and more like an avenging angel. "No one touches what belongs to me," he said, extending his hand toward me. I took it without hesitation, letting him pull me to my feet. In that moment, with death surrounding us and violence painting the air red, I realized something that should have terrified me. I wanted to belong to Lorenzo Valenti more than I wanted to breathe. "Come," he said, guiding me toward the hidden passage. "We have work to do." As we disappeared into the darkness behind the wall, leaving the sounds of battle behind us, I understood that whatever happened next would determine not just whether I lived or died, but who I would become if I survived. The woman who entered that passage wasn't the same one who'd entered Lorenzo's car less than 24 hours ago. That Isabella Parker had been a victim, a woman who accepted abandonment and betrayal as the price of love. This Isabella was someone else entirely, someone who might be worth fighting for after all. The safe room beneath Lorenzo's mansion was a marvel of paranoid engineering. Steel-reinforced walls, independent air supply, enough food and water for 2 weeks, and communication equipment that could reach anywhere in the world. I sat in stunned silence on a leather sofa that probably cost more than my annual salary, watching Lorenzo coordinate his response to the attack through encrypted phones and video monitors. David was alive. The cameras throughout the property had captured Viktor Petrov's men dragging him from a black van before the shooting started. He was battered and terrified, but breathing. That should have been my only concern. Instead, I found myself fixated on the man pacing the small space like a caged predator, his movements fluid despite the bandages I'd wrapped around his torso just hours earlier. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked, when he finally ended his latest call. Lorenzo paused mid-stride, his pale eyes fixing on me with that unsettling intensity I was beginning to recognize. "Planning what?" "David's debts. The Russians. Me ending up in your car." I stood up, sudden anger overriding my fear. "None of this is coincidence, is it? You think I orchestrated your husband's gambling addiction?" There was genuine curiosity in his voice, as if my accusation intrigued rather than offended him. "I think you're the kind of man who manipulates situations to get what he wants." I crossed my arms, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "And for some reason you wanted me." Very perceptive. Lorenzo set his phone aside and gave me his full attention. "You're right, of course. Though not in the way you imagine. Then explain it to me." He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if cataloging every micro-expression. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. Something that might have been regret. "I've been watching David Parker for 6 months. Not because of his debts, but because of his connection to you." Lorenzo moved closer, and I fought the urge to step back. "Your husband wasn't just gambling, Isabella. He was laundering money for Viktor Petrov." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's impossible." "Is it? All those construction jobs that paid cash, the mysterious phone calls, the sudden influx of money followed by devastating losses." Lorenzo's expression was almost sympathetic. David was cleaning Russian funds through a network of legitimate businesses. The gambling debts were just cover for what he was really doing. My legs felt suddenly weak. I sank back onto the sofa, mind reeling with implications I'd been too naive to see. He was working for them, among others. David is what we call a useful idiot, someone who does criminal work without understanding the larger picture. Lorenzo sat beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. But useful idiots become liabilities when they start asking questions or getting greedy. So Victor decided to eliminate him. Victor decided to use him as bait. David's real value wasn't his money laundering skills. It was his access to you. I stared at Lorenzo, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. Me? Why would anyone want access to me? Because you work at St. Mary's Children's Hospital. Because you have access to medical records, patient information, surgical schedules. Lorenzo's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Because several of my associates' children receive treatment there, and their medical information would be invaluable to my enemies. The scope of the conspiracy took my breath away. You think they wanted me to spy on your people's children? I think they wanted to use you as leverage against me. Information about when certain patients would be most vulnerable, when security would be lightest. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Victor has been trying to find weaknesses in my organization for years. What better way than through innocent medical professionals who wouldn't even realize they were being used? But I never gave anyone information about patients. I would never. I know. His voice softened unexpectedly. That's why I intervened. Intervened how? But even as I asked, I was beginning to understand. You manipulated David's debts, made sure he owed more than he could pay. I encouraged his existing weaknesses, yes. Made sure his gambling losses mounted quickly enough that Victor would have to act. Lorenzo didn't look away from my accusing stare. I needed Victor to reveal his hand before he could properly recruit you. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. Not just David's lies, but Lorenzo's manipulation. You used me as bait. I used you as bait to protect you. His hand moved toward mine, then stopped when I flinched away. If Victor had approached you gradually, gained your trust, convinced you that helping him would save your marriage or pay your bills, would you have refused? The honest answer terrified me. 3 months ago, desperate and exhausted, I might have been vulnerable to exactly that kind of manipulation. You don't know that, don't I? Lorenzo's pale eyes seemed to see straight through me. You've been cleaning up David's messes for 3 years, working double shifts to cover his losses, pretending your marriage wasn't slowly killing you because leaving seemed harder than staying. Each word was a surgical strike against defenses I'd spent years building. That doesn't give you the right to manipulate my entire life. No, he agreed quietly. It doesn't. But it gave me the responsibility to protect you from people who would have destroyed you without a second thought. By destroying my husband instead? By giving you the chance to see who David really was before it was too late. Lorenzo stood and moved to one of the monitors, where grainy security footage showed Victor's men positioning themselves around the mansion's perimeter. The question now is what you want to do with that knowledge. I stared at his back, emotions warring inside me like competing storms. Anger at his manipulation, fear for David's safety, and underneath it all, a terrible gratitude that someone had finally told me the truth about my marriage. What are my options? You can continue pretending David is worth saving. Go home, clean up this mess. Spend the rest of your life wondering when the next crisis will hit. Lorenzo turned to face me, and I saw something vulnerable in his expression. Or you can accept that some situations can't be fixed, only escaped. And if I choose escape, what then? Then you stay here, under my protection, and we figure out how to build something better than what you're leaving behind. The offer hung between us like a bridge over dangerous water. Crossing it would mean abandoning everything I'd thought I wanted, everything I'd tried to build with David. But staying on this side meant returning to a life that had been slowly suffocating me for years. I need to know David is safe first, I said finally. Lorenzo nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. We'll get him back. But Isabella, he paused, searching for words. Don't mistake rescue for reconciliation. Some bridges burn completely, and trying to rebuild them only leads to more destruction. The sound of gunfire from above had stopped, replaced by the low murmur of voices and footsteps. Lorenzo's men, regaining control of the situation. Soon, we'd have to leave this underground sanctuary and face whatever came next. I thought about David, terrified and beaten in Victor's hands. I thought about 3 years of marriage built on lies and manipulation. I thought about the woman who'd entered Lorenzo's car 2 days ago, and the woman I was becoming in this steel-reinforced room beneath a mansion owned by a man who collected empires like other people collected art. When this is over, I said quietly, I want the truth. All of it. No more manipulation, no more protection through deception. And if the truth is uglier than the lies? I met his pale eyes without flinching. Then at least I'll know what I'm choosing. Lorenzo smiled then. the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from him. "In that case, Isabella Parker, I think you're going to be very dangerous." The communication equipment buzzed with an incoming message. Lorenzo checked the screen, and his expression hardened back into the mask of controlled violence I was learning to recognize. "What is it?" I asked. "Victor wants to negotiate. He's offering to trade David for you, 1 hour, neutral ground. And I think it's time Victor Petrov learned that nobody takes what belongs to me." Lorenzo's smile turned predatory. "Are you ready to see how wars end, Isabella? Despite everything, the fear, the betrayal, the complete upheaval of everything I'd thought I knew about my life?" I found myself nodding. I was ready. The abandoned warehouse where Victor had chosen to meet reeked of rust and decay, its broken windows letting in shafts of pale winter sunlight that illuminated floating dust motes like dying stars. I stood behind a concrete pillar, heart hammering against my ribs as I watched the most dangerous men in the city position themselves for war. Lorenzo's plan was insane. Instead of negotiating or mounting a traditional rescue, he'd decided to use Victor's trap as an opportunity to end their conflict permanently. David was bait, Victor was the target, and somehow I'd become the key to destroying them both. "Remember," Lorenzo had said as we'd driven through empty industrial streets toward this moment of reckoning, "Victor believes you're an innocent pawn caught between forces you don't understand. Let him keep believing that until it's too late." Now, watching Victor Petrov emerge from the shadows with David stumbling beside him, duct tape over his mouth, hands bound behind his back, eyes wild with terror, I wondered if I really was as innocent as everyone assumed. The woman who'd entered Lorenzo's car 3 days ago would never have agreed to this plan. She would have begged for peaceful resolution, offered herself in exchange for her husband's safety, chosen martyrdom over violence. But that woman had died somewhere between discovering David's betrayal and feeling the touch of Lorenzo's hands. What remained was someone harder, more calculating, someone who understood that mercy was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Isabella Parker," Victor called out, his accented voice echoing off the warehouse walls. "Come out, little nurse. Time to collect your husband." I stepped into the open space between the pillars, hands raised to show I was unarmed. Victor was exactly what I'd expected from Lorenzo's descriptions. Tall, lean, with the kind of pale good looks that turned predatory under scrutiny. His smile reminded me of winter, beautiful but deadly. "There she is," he said, gesturing for his men to spread out in a loose semicircle. "The woman worth so much trouble." David's eyes found mine over the tape covering his mouth. I saw relief there, hope, the absolute faith that I would save him the way I'd saved him from everything else over the past 3 years. The weight of that expectation should have crushed me. Instead, I felt nothing but a cold assessment of the situation. "Let him go," I said, proud that my voice didn't shake. "You have what you wanted." "Do I?" Victor stepped closer, dragging David with him. I wanted Lorenzo Valenti's weakness. Instead, I find myself wondering if you're more dangerous than valuable. I'm a pediatric nurse. The only danger I pose is to your men's tetanus vaccinations. Victor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Humor. I like that in a woman. "Tell me, Isabella, what do you know about your husband's business arrangements?" I know he's a gambling addict who makes poor decisions. I kept my voice level, matter of fact. I know he borrowed money he couldn't repay. And that's all? What else would there be? Victor studied my face for signs of deception. Behind him I could see Lorenzo's men moving through the warehouse's upper levels, silent as shadows. Marcus crouched behind an overturned shipping container, rifle trained on Victor's position. 2 others had flanked the Russians from the east, waiting for Lorenzo's signal. "Your husband was washing money for my organization," Victor said finally. Quite successfully, until his gambling problem made him unreliable. I let shock register on my face, widening my eyes and taking a small step backward. "Money laundering? David doesn't know anything about that kind of business." "Doesn't he? Then how do you explain the $47,000 in cash we found hidden in your apartment?" My blood actually ran cold at that revelation. There had been money hidden in our home and I'd never known about it. How many other secrets had David kept from me? How many other lies had I accepted without question? I didn't know. Of course you didn't. Victor's smile grew wider. Lorenzo chose well when he decided to claim you. A woman who sees only what she wants to see, who asks no difficult questions, who cleans up messes without complaint. Perfect for a man in his position. Lorenzo didn't claim me. I'm married to David. Are you? Married to a man who used you as collateral? Who sold information about your hospital to finance his debts? Victor gestured toward David, whose expression had gone from hopeful to ashamed. Did you know your husband provided patient schedules for 3 of Lorenzo's associates' children? Surgery dates, recovery periods, visiting hours. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. David hadn't just been washing money. He'd been trading information that could have gotten children killed. Children I might have been treating, holding their hands as they faced surgery, comforting them when they cried for their parents. You're lying, I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew he wasn't. Ask him yourself. Victor ripped the tape from David's mouth, causing him to cry out in pain. Isabella. David's voice was hoarse, desperate. I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. They said they just needed schedules, harmless information. I didn't know they were planning to hurt anyone. You gave them children's medical information? My voice came out flat, emotionless. I had debts, serious debts. These people don't accept payment plans. David's eyes filled with tears. I thought if I helped them with some minor details, they'd forgive what I owed. Minor details. I repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. Children's surgery schedules are minor details. Nothing happened. No one got hurt. Because Lorenzo stopped you, the pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture so ugly I could barely comprehend it. He found out what you were doing and made sure Victor couldn't use that information. Victor's smile faltered slightly. He'd expected my shock to turn to forgiveness, or at least to pity for my husband. Instead, I was looking at David like he was something toxic I'd accidentally touched. Isabella, please. David begged. I love you. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can start over. Start over? I laughed, and the sound echoed strangely in the empty warehouse. You mean like we started over after the gambling? After the lies about working late? After leaving me in a storm because I wouldn't give you children you could put in danger? I would never hurt a child. You already did. The moment you sold their information, you hurt every child in that hospital. I took a step closer and David actually flinched. How much were you paid for each surgery schedule, David? What's the going rate for a 10-year-old's recovery period? Victor was watching this exchange with growing unease. This wasn't how interrogations usually went. Victims were supposed to forgive their loved ones, not systematically destroy them with cold logic. Enough, he said, raising his weapon. This is touching. But I have business to conclude. Isabella, you will come with me. Your husband will remain here as insurance against Lorenzo's retaliation. No, I said simply. No? Victor's eyebrows rose. I don't think you understand your position here. I understand it perfectly. I looked directly into his pale eyes, letting him see the calculation there. You need me alive to control Lorenzo, but you need David alive to control me, which means neither of you has the power you think you do. That's when Lorenzo stepped out of the shadows behind Victor, gun pressed against the Russian's skull. Actually, Lorenzo said conversationally, I have all the power I need. Victor's men spun toward the sound of his voice, only to find themselves staring down the barrels of rifles held by Lorenzo's soldiers. Marcus alone had 3 different angles covered, and I could see at least 5 other weapons trained on the Russians from various hiding spots throughout the warehouse. Isabella, Lorenzo continued without taking his eyes off Victor, step away from your husband. I obeyed without hesitation, moving toward Lorenzo's position with steady steps. The moment I was clear, Marcus's first shot took out Victor's lieutenant. The man dropped like a stone, blood spreading across the concrete floor. Now then, Lorenzo said, pressing his gun harder against Victor's skull. Let's discuss the terms of your surrender. But Victor was laughing, even with a gun to his head. You think you've won? You think killing me ends this? I think killing you sends a message to anyone else who might consider targeting what's mine. And what about him? Victor nodded toward David, who was sobbing openly now. What message does keeping him alive send? Lorenzo's pale eyes flicked to me, asking a question he couldn't voice in front of Victor. What did I want him to do with the man who'd betrayed not just me, but children under my professional care? I looked at David, really looked at him, and saw not the man I'd married, but a weak, selfish stranger who'd put money ahead of innocent lives, who'd used my compassion as a shield for his cowardice, who would do it all again if given the chance, because that's who he fundamentally was. David made his choice, I said quietly. Now he lives with the consequences. Lorenzo's smile was sharp as winter wind. You heard the lady, Victor. Some bridges burn completely. The gunshot that followed was surprisingly quiet in the vast space of the warehouse. Victor Petrov crumpled to the floor, his war with the Valenti family finally over. David screamed through his bonds, but I felt nothing as I watched the man who'd threatened children bleed out on concrete. This was justice, not murder. This was protection, not violence. This was the moment I stopped being Isabella Parker and became something else entirely. Lorenzo holstered his weapon and turned to me, searching my face for signs of shock or regret. What he found instead was acceptance, resolution, and something that might have been relief. No going back now, he said softly. Good, I replied, and meant it completely. War came to the city in the form of unmarked vans and midnight explosions. 3 weeks after Victor's death, his lieutenants emerged from hiding like cockroaches scattered by sudden light. They wanted blood, Lorenzo's blood, and they were willing to burn down half the city to get it. I watched the violence unfold from the safety of Lorenzo's reinforced penthouse, high above streets where black SUVs prowled like mechanical predators. The news called it a gang war, territorial disputes between organized crime families. They had no idea they were witnessing the death throes of an empire built on the suffering of children. Dmitry Kozlov has taken control of Victor's operations, Lorenzo said, studying surveillance footage on multiple screens. He's more pragmatic than his predecessor, but also more ruthless. And David? I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered anymore. Being held at a medical facility on the east side. Kozlov is using him as insurance, leverage in case negotiations become necessary. 3 weeks ago, the mention of David's captivity would have sent me into panic. Now I felt only cold calculation. David had made his choices, sold children's safety for gambling money, betrayed me with the same casual thoughtlessness he'd shown throughout our marriage. Whatever happened to him now was simply consequence meeting cause. They'll kill him eventually, I said matter-of-factly. Yes. Lorenzo turned from the monitors, his pale eyes studying my face. Does that bother you? It should. I moved to the window overlooking the city, watching smoke rise from a warehouse district where another Russian front had been eliminated. A week ago, it would have destroyed me. Now I can barely remember why I thought he was worth saving. Guilt is a luxury we can't afford during wartime. Is that what this is? A war? It's extermination. Lorenzo joined me at the window, his presence warm and solid beside me. Victor's organization was a cancer. Cutting out the tumor isn't enough. You have to eliminate every malignant cell or it spreads. The metaphor was apt. As a nurse, I'd seen too many children lost to diseases that seemed contained until they suddenly weren't. Sometimes radical treatment was the only option, even when it seemed brutal to outside observers. I want to help, I said quietly. Lorenzo went very still beside me. Help how? You said they're holding David at a medical facility. I know medical facilities better than anyone on your payroll. I turned to meet his gaze, letting him see the resolve there. I know how to get inside, how to move through them undetected, how to access areas where outsiders would be noticed immediately. Isabella, they're using sick people as shields, I continued, anger heating my voice. Patients who need care, who trusted that facility to protect them. That makes this personal. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than leaving David alive to testify against you? More dangerous than letting Kozlov think he has leverage? I stepped closer, close enough to smell Lorenzo's cologne, to see the silver flecks in his pale eyes. I'm already part of this war, Lorenzo. Let me fight instead of just hiding. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, his hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone with exquisite gentleness. If something happens to you, nothing will happen to me. I'm too valuable alive, remember? and too dangerous to underestimate. I leaned into his touch, feeling the calluses on his fingers, the strength barely held in check. Besides, I'll have the best backup in the city. My men don't know medical protocols, hospital security, staff rotations, patient privacy laws. Then it's good they'll have a guide. Lorenzo was quiet for another heartbeat. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute command. No unnecessary risks. You follow my lead, obey my orders without question, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? And Isabella? His grip on my face tightened almost imperceptibly. If we do this, there's no going back. You'll have crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I thought about the children whose surgery schedules David had sold, about the trust he'd betrayed, about the woman I'd been who cleaned up messes without asking why they kept happening. That woman was already gone, dissolved in the rain on a December night that felt like a lifetime ago. Good, I said. I'm tired of being someone who watches from the sidelines. The medical facility where Kozlov was holding David occupied an entire city block, a maze of interconnected buildings that had grown organically over decades. Perfect for hiding prisoners in plain sight, terrible for anyone trying to mount a rescue without proper inside knowledge. I walked through the main entrance at 11 p.m., dressed in scrubs I'd borrowed from my apartment and carrying forged credentials that identified me as Isabella Martinez, a traveling nurse brought in to help with the night shift. Lorenzo's people had done their homework. Isabella Martinez was a real person, currently vacationing in Aruba, whose employment history and qualifications were impeccable. The security guard barely glanced at my ID before waving me through. Medical facilities were notoriously understaffed and overworked. Temporary help was so common that new faces rarely attracted attention. I knew from Lorenzo's surveillance that David was being held in a private room on the 4th floor, the psychiatric wing where visitors were limited, and security cameras had convenient blind spots. Getting there required navigating a maze of corridors I'd memorized from stolen floor plans, avoiding nurses who might recognize me from my real job across town. The hardest part wasn't the infiltration. It was maintaining professional detachment as I passed rooms full of genuinely sick patients, children recovering from surgery, elderly patients fighting infections, people who had nothing to do with the war being fought around them, but who might become casualties anyway if Kozlov decided civilian shields weren't sufficient protection. David's room was at the end of a dimly lit hallway, guarded by a single man who looked more like a bouncer than medical staff. I approached with the confident stride of someone who belonged there, clipboard in hand, expression bored with routine. "Excuse me," I said in Spanish-accented English. "I need to check vitals on the patient in 4B. The guard looked me up and down, taking in the scrubs, the ID badge, the professional attitude. Nobody goes in without clearance from Kozlov. Then get clearance. This man has a heart condition that requires monitoring every 4 hours. Unless you want to explain to your boss why his leverage died of cardiac arrest." Uncertainty flickered in the guard's eyes. He pulled out a phone, speaking in rapid Russian. While he was distracted, I palmed the syringe I'd prepared. Not poison, just a fast-acting sedative that would put him down for several hours without permanent harm. "Kozlov says no visitors," the guard said, ending his call. "I'm not a visitor. I'm medical staff." I stepped closer. Invasion of personal space making him shift uncomfortably. "Look, I don't care about your business. I don't want to know why this patient is here or what you're planning to do with him. I just need to make sure he doesn't die before you're finished with him." The guard wavered, glancing between me and the closed door. That moment of indecision was all I needed. The needle slid between his ribs before he could react, finding the precise spot where it would deliver maximum effect with minimal damage. He crumpled to the floor within seconds, unconscious but breathing steadily. I dragged him into a supply closet, then used his keycard to access David's room. My husband lay strapped to a hospital bed, face bruised and swollen from beatings, eyes glazed with whatever drugs they'd used to keep him compliant. He looked up when I entered, confusion flickering across his features. "Isabella?" His voice was slurred, uncertain. Why are you here?" "To end this." I moved to his bedside, checking his restraints with professional efficiency. "To make sure Kozlov can't use you anymore." "Use me?" David's eyes struggled to focus. "I don't understand." "I know." I prepared another syringe. this one containing a different substance entirely. Something I'd synthesized from supplies in Lorenzo's extensive collection. Something that would stop a heart without leaving obvious traces. You never did understand the consequences of your choices. Recognition dawned in David's eyes as he saw the needle. Isabella, please. I'm your husband. I love you. You sold information about children, David. Children I might have been treating, holding their hands while they faced surgery. I found a vein in his arm with practiced ease. You turned my profession into a weapon against innocence. I was desperate. I never meant... You meant to take the easy way out. You meant to let other people pay for your mistakes. The needle slid home smoothly, just like you always did. David's eyes widened as the drug took effect, his body arching against the restraints as his heart began to race, then falter. Isabella, please. I watched dispassionately as the man I'd married died, feeling nothing but relief that he could never hurt another child. When his heart stopped, I closed his eyes gently and straightened the blanket around his body. To anyone who discovered him later, it would look like cardiac arrest brought on by stress and poor health. The fire alarm began wailing as I left the room, right on schedule. Lorenzo's men had set charges in the building's basement, creating enough chaos and evacuation orders to cover my escape. In the confusion of patients being moved and staff running emergency protocols, one traveling nurse disappearing into the night would go completely unnoticed. I met Lorenzo in the parking garage 6 blocks away, his pale eyes searching my face for signs of trauma or regret. What he found instead was the calm satisfaction of someone who'd finally stopped cleaning up other people's messes and started solving problems permanently. It's done, I said, stripping off the bloody gloves and dropping them into the disposal bag he provided. Any complications? None. Kozlov just lost his primary leverage, and the city just lost a man who endangered children for gambling money. I looked back toward the medical facility, where emergency vehicles were arriving to handle the fire alarm. Justice served. Lorenzo pulled me against him, strong arms wrapping around me with possessive relief. Welcome to the family business, Isabella. I tilted my face up to his, finally ready to claim what I wanted instead of what I thought I deserved. About time. When he kissed me this time, it wasn't gentle or questioning. It was claiming, possessing, marking me as his in ways that went far beyond protection or circumstance. I responded with equal hunger, finally admitting what I'd been denying since that first night in his car. I belonged to Lorenzo Valenti completely, and I'd just proven I was worthy of belonging to something that powerful. The war was over. My real life was just beginning. 6 months after David's death, I stood in the bathroom of Lorenzo's penthouse, staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test that would change everything. My hands trembled as I set the plastic stick on the marble counter, mind racing through implications I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Outside, the city sprawled beneath us like a conquered kingdom. Lorenzo's empire had expanded exponentially since Victor's elimination. The remaining Russian operations had been absorbed or destroyed, their territories redistributed among families willing to acknowledge Valenti's supremacy. What had once been a brutal war for control had become a systematic consolidation of power, and I had been part of it all. The woman who'd entered Lorenzo's car 7 months ago would have been horrified by what I'd become. Isabella Parker had been soft, forgiving, willing to accept crumbs of affection in exchange for the illusion of normalcy. She'd believed in redemption, second chances, the fundamental goodness of people who consistently proved her wrong. Isabella Valenti was something else entirely. Isabella? Lorenzo's voice carried through the bedroom, warm with the kind of contentment I'd never heard from him before our wedding 3 months ago. Rosa wants to know if you have any preferences for dinner tonight. Our wedding. The memory still took my breath away. Not the courthouse ceremony I'd endured with David, but something worthy of Renaissance royalty. 500 guests in an Italian cathedral, dress designed specifically for my body, diamonds that caught light like captured stars. I'd walk down an aisle lined with white roses toward a man who looked at me like I was the answer to prayers he'd never spoken aloud. But it was the reception that had truly marked my transformation. When Lorenzo introduced me as La Regina, the Queen, every person in that room had bowed their heads in genuine respect. Not because I'd married their boss, but because I'd proven worthy of the title. Whatever Rosa thinks is best, I called back, still staring at the test. 2 pink lines. Positive. Pregnant. with Lorenzo's child. The bathroom door opened, and my husband appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the evening in charcoal slacks and a black shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. 6 months of marriage had only made him more beautiful to me, more essential than breathing. His pale eyes immediately found the pregnancy test on the counter. For a heartbeat, his expression went completely blank. Then something blazed to life in those winter sky depths. Something so intense it made my knees weak. "Isabella." My name was barely a whisper. "Are you—" "Yes." I turned to face him fully, letting him see the wonder and terror warring in my expression. "We're having a baby." Lorenzo crossed the bathroom in 2 swift strides, pulling me against him with trembling hands. His face buried in my hair, and I felt the shudder that ran through his powerful frame. "When?" His voice was muffled against my neck. "I'm probably 6 weeks along. Maybe 7. I pulled back to meet his gaze. Are we ready for this?" Lorenzo's smile was radiant, transforming his features from dangerous to devastating. "I've been ready since the night I found you in my car." The admission made my chest tight with emotion. "You have? I knew you were different. Special. The kind of woman who could stand beside me, not behind me." His hands moved to frame my face with exquisite care. "The kind of woman who could give me children worth building an empire for. And if those children ask questions about how Mommy and Daddy met, about what we do for work," Lorenzo's expression grew thoughtful, "we'll tell them the truth. That sometimes the world is dangerous, and protecting the people you love requires difficult choices. They'll know what we are. They'll know we're their parents, and that everything we do is to ensure they never have to make the same choices we did." Lorenzo's thumb traced the line of my cheekbone. "They'll know they're loved beyond measure." The certainty in his voice steadied something inside me I hadn't realized was shaking. This wasn't how I'd imagined becoming a mother, married to a man who commanded criminal enterprises, pregnant with a child who would inherit both vast wealth and dangerous enemies. But standing in Lorenzo's arms, feeling the strength and protection he radiated like heat, I couldn't imagine wanting any other future. 2 years later, I said suddenly. "What?" I smiled, imagining our future with sudden crystalline clarity. "Ask me in 2 years if I regret any of this. Ask me if I miss the woman who got into your car that night. And what will you tell me? That Isabella Parker died in a storm, and Isabella Valenti was born from her ashes." I rose on my toes to kiss him, pouring all my love and certainty into the connection. That she was reborn into something infinitely more powerful. 2 years later, I stood in the nursery of our new estate, a sprawling mansion outside the city where our children could grow up with space to run and guards to keep them safe, holding our 6-month-old son while watching our 15-month-old daughter take tentative steps across the plush carpet. Lucia had Lorenzo's pale eyes and my stubborn chin. Marco, named for the man who'd become like family to us both, had my coloring but his father's intense stare. Both were perfect, healthy, and blissfully unaware that their parents' love story had begun with violence and been sealed with blood. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, still wearing his business suit, but with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. He'd been in meetings all day, restructuring our legitimate enterprises to provide cleaner income streams for future generations. The Valenti Foundation now operated 12 hospitals across 3 states, all providing world-class pediatric care. My professional background had proven invaluable in designing programs that actually helped children rather than exploiting them. "How was your day?" I asked, transferring baby Marco to his father's eager arms. "Productive. We acquired controlling interest in another pharmaceutical company, and the city council approved our proposal for the new children's wing." Lorenzo settled into the rocking chair, cradling our son with the same gentle competence he'd shown since the moment our children were born. "How was yours?" Lucia took 4 steps without holding on to anything. I scooped up our daughter, who immediately began babbling in the mixture of Italian and English that comprised her current vocabulary. And I had lunch with Rosa to discuss the charity gala next month. "Any problems with security arrangements?" "None. Marcus has everything handled." I studied my husband's face, noting the satisfaction there. "You're pleased about something specific. Dmitry Kozlov was arrested this morning. Federal trafficking charges. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison." Lorenzo's smile was sharp with old vengeance. "The last of Victor's lieutenants is finally gone." "Good." I felt no guilt about my satisfaction. Kozlov had ordered the murder of 3 children during his brief reign as head of the Russian operations. His imprisonment was justice, not cruelty. The children are safer now. All children are safer now. Lorenzo looked up at me, pale eyes soft with something that still took my breath away after all this time. Do you ever regret it? Any of it? I settled onto the arm of his chair, our little family complete and perfect in this moment. Outside, security teams patrolled grounds that stretched for acres in every direction. Below, Rosa was preparing dinner with ingredients sourced from the organic garden we'd had installed last spring. Beyond the estate's walls, a city largely at peace prospered under the protection of a man who'd learned to channel violence into justice. I regret nothing, I said, meaning it completely. The woman who married David Parker wanted safety at any cost. The woman who chose you wanted something worth fighting for. And what was that? I looked at our children, at the man who'd given me a love I'd never thought possible, at the life we'd built from the ashes of who I used to be, everything we have right now. Lorenzo reached up to cup my face, thumb tracing the familiar path along my cheekbone. I love you, Isabella Valenti. And I love you, Lorenzo Valenti. More than I ever loved the woman I used to be. That evening, after our children were asleep and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, I stood once again at a window overlooking a city we'd helped shape. But this time, Lorenzo's arms were wrapped around me from behind, his hands resting protectively over the slight curve where our 3rd child was just beginning to grow. What are you thinking about? He murmured against my hair. That storm, I said softly. The night everything changed. Do you wish it had never happened? I leaned back against his solid warmth, watching lights twinkle across our domain like earthbound stars. I wish it had happened sooner. Lorenzo's laughter rumbled through his chest, vibrating against my back. Bloodthirsty queen. Your bloodthirsty queen, I corrected, turning in his arms to face the man who'd transformed my life in ways I was still discovering. Forever. Forever, he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like victory, like vindication, like a love story that had been worth every dangerous step we'd taken to reach it. Outside, rain began to fall. Not the punishing storm that had driven me into Lorenzo's car, but gentle drops that nourished the gardens where our children would play tomorrow. Protected and cherished beyond measure, the woman who'd been left crying in a parking garage was gone forever. In her place stood Isabella Valenti, queen of an empire built on loyalty and love, mother to children who would never know abandonment or betrayal. I was exactly where I belonged, and I would never let anyone take it from me again.